These measurements have become a well-known fact or indicator about current performances of companies. These measurements have also been very easily and nicely understood in various forms by us. In the last so many years of industrialization or our learnings, we have all understood how is profit calculated. Profit is equal to selling price minus cost price. We all know this formula. And inherently, when a worker is working in the company or a line manager or a divisional manager taking a call, the thing under his control is cost. And he focuses very heavily on this thing called cost. Anytime he thinks he saved some cost, he thinks it's a benefit to the company and indirectly will translate into better profits. This formula has been driving the behavior in manufacturing companies over the last 30 to 40 years, which has been translated into many cliched sentences too, like we should be the low cost manufacturer of a product, or the investment flows from the region of high cost of manufacturing to a region of low cost of manufacturing. Cost, cost, cost is everywhere. Now, why is this cost confusing? The reason why it is confusing is we use it very loosely. For example, this service cost me money. Yes, I am using the service, so I have to pay for it. But when I go to the manufacturing area, I also use the same word called this machine cost me money. Now that cost is actually has to be incurred. If you don't incur the cost of the machine, how do you manufacture? The correct terminology would be investment for the cost of machine. So the cost being used loosely for expense and the cost being used loosely for investment has created a conflict in the minds of many people. So one cost is an investment, because if you don't have investment, how do you manufacture? The second cost is expense. We have been trained on many fundamental terminologies like cost, profit and sales price, and many mathematical equations have been put to us which tell us the relations between these three and how by increasing one the second will be more, or by decreasing one the first will be more. And these equations are called cost, profit and price equations. Let us look at three such equations. Equation 1, price minus cost is equal to profit. Equation 2, profit is equal to price minus cost. Equation number 3, price is equal to profit plus cost. It may seem that these three are nothing but one equation, and yes, they are mathematically right, but then these three are very different way of thinking. If one has to calculate based on these three equations, the answer to them might be same, but the thought process behind these equations is much different. Equation number 1 assumes that the selling price of a product is not in control of the company. That means the company is in competition with somebody else and the third party sets the price. What it has in its control is the cost. So if it controls the cost, it lands up making a profit. Selling price is decided by the market. Cost is controlled by the company. And the resultant of this cost control is the profit. The third equation is an equation where the calculation decides the selling price. That means the better the accuracy of cost calculations, the better the pricing, because the judgment of how much of profit we should make is decided by me or decided by a government. If the government thinks that an X amount of profit is justified, so you do a very robust cost calculations and the government allows you to make that X amount of profit and hence the selling price is decided. This kind of equations are usually used in monopolies or utility companies where the respectable profit or an acceptable level of profit is decided by the government. Let's come to the second equation. The second equation is the trickiest one. What it says, profit is equal to selling price minus cost. This equation drives a behavior or an understanding that we need to make a certain amount of profit. And to make that kind of profit, what kind of value should I put in my product for which I can get an acceptable price? So price being the driving factor. Here the assumption is the cost cannot be much controlled by the company. This philosophy drives a behavior to sell luxury goods. So I need to create a value perception in my customer's eyes for which I can actually charge a higher price, because a certain amount of profit has to be made. In fact, this to a great extent drives many companies because their share prices fluctuate based on the profit they make. In other words, to keep their share prices going up, they have to constantly make sure that the profit keeps going up. Now one can assume that their selling price is in their control. The cost is what they cannot control. However, these companies have also decided that they shall not compete on costs. They compete on value offering. And this is the equation that drives the mentality for luxury goods. It can be very easily argued that why do you want to make a huge number of low-cost cars where you can make the same amount of profit by selling much smaller number of luxury cars? It can happen that the luxury car you make might be a tougher thing to do than to make a low-cost car. However, if you have a control on the selling price, or if you have a control on designing and making a luxury product for which the customer is ready to pay, you should be able to get the profit that you desire. However, most of us do not work with these equations. The mentality of most companies is the mentality of equation number 1, which is the price minus cost is equal to profit. Price is governed by the market forces. So what is in my control is the cost. as long as I can manage my costs, control my costs, I will end up making a profit. Just because the cost can be calculated, that does not mean that you have the ability to reduce cost. Cost reduction approach or producing an item or a product at least cost is much more complicated and hard work than as we see in the equation. Costs have a behavior. As you can see, a lot of misconceptions can be born from a simple equation. And also, they can be born because we are looked at from the existing measurements. One of the thought process that comes out by understanding these three different equations is one can have different views to the same equation. Somebody may say that it is better to make more profit than to sell cheap cars. However, one thing can be very easily said. The cost figure that is being used in these equations is not there to be calculated. The cost is there to be reduced. In the earlier section, I mentioned how inventory sometimes can be viewed as an asset, as put on our balance sheet and profit and loss statements, and sometimes the same asset can be viewed as a liability because it impacts the cash flow. Let me spend some more time to try and bring out this conflict. But this time, I shall not use the profit and loss statements or our financial accounting statements. Now, we all know that the purpose of the business is, we are now very convinced that the purpose of the business is to make more money, or it should remain healthy. If a business has to remain healthy in the future, it should protect its future earning capability and it should retain its current health while doing its business. So, with an eye on trying to be competitive in the near future, it has to meet certain conditions. But if it has to remain healthy today, it has to meet certain conditions. Let's look at these two conditions from the point of view of inventory. If the business has to remain agile in the future, it should be able to adapt very quickly, in the sense that it should be able to introduce new products, sell quickly, and produce the items which is selling fast. But if it is caught up with huge amounts of inventory which it cannot sell or liquidate or move, it becomes less agile. That means, if this condition of agility has to be met, it should carry less inventory, because the demands of the future are uncertain and we do not know what kind of demand will exist, and based on this demand the product mix may change. To produce to the demand, currently I should carry less inventory. Now, the other side of the healthy part of the business is, I should be healthy now. To be healthy now, I should also protect my sales. To protect my sales, I should carry inventory. the interpretation is like this: I should have my material in stock so that when the demand arises, I'm able to sell. Now, one part of my health says be healthy right now, which requires me to hold inventory. The other part says don't hold inventory. Do you understand what kind of a conflict this is creating? A blind understanding of inventory is going to make it very tough for us to balance this act. We can put in so many measurements to make sure that this conflict doesn't exist. But what we'll end up doing is a balancing act, a compromise between both the extremes. One condition is forcing you to keep inventory, the second condition is forcing you to reduce inventory. But the big thing is that both these conditions are necessary conditions. They will need to coexist if the business has to work. Policies and misconceptions based on this conflict will only confuse operations. So we need to simplify our measurements or our understandings of inventory in such a way that this conflict does not arise. We are moving towards a much simplified measurements. Before that, we will also understand the two different environments which are existing in front of us, so that we can choose the better mode of conducting our business, and which shall help us actually simplify our management conflicts.